we've got two groups working together this time. So we've got the Coomandook group, and also got the Mannum group here as well. So the Mannum group, which is led by, or facilitated by Tony Craddock, and of course the Coomandook group, which I facilitate. So Brendan Wallis, for those of you who don't know me. Today's session, look, we plan on running through. We've got a set to, well, we've got a bit of an agenda running, so we'll just work through a bit of an icebreaker to start. Then we'll move into Peter Boutsalis' presentation on Group A herbicides and getting the best use out of those. Then we'll move into a bit of a issues and innovation session, looking at what's happening out there and getting people's views on how we can overcome those issues, and also looking at some innovations that we can potentially utilise to improve our own efficiencies on the farm. And then also to finish off, we'll look at any management tips for the next between now and our next catch up. So that's the outline of the plan. So now just what I wanted to do is just roll through everyone, get everyone to introduce themselves, say who you are, where you're from, and what pulses you grow or manage. So if we start with, well, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan, and thanks for opening the meeting, and also allowing the Mannum group to participate as well. Yeah, I'm Tony Craddock. I'm an agronomist with Rural Directions, and based at Freeling, but I cover virtually all parts of the state except for Eyre Peninsula, I reckon. And the pulse crops that I cover are virtually the lot. Yeah, I can't think of any that grown in South Australia that I don't. So yeah, over the districts I cover, there's obviously quite a few pulse crops to keep across.
Andrew, if we move on to you next.
Yeah, Andrew Henson, Coomandook, farmer from Coomandook. We're growing beans and lupins as well, and also a bit of vetch for stock feed pasture.
Awesome, thank you. Brett. Having troubles there. Brett, can you hear us? Oh, lost him. What about Craig? Just so you've joined, so we're doing a bit of an icebreaker, so just working through who you are, where you're from, and what pulses you grow or manage.
I just work out of Cooper's Farm Supplies, Adelaide Hills. Agronomy.
Dale? Yes, from Dale. How about Nev? If we move to you.
Righto, Brendan. Yeah, mate, farming at Field or Canalpin. This year we're only growing beans, Samira beans. We've previously grown chickpeas and lupins as well. I guess just on the pasture pulses, we've got lucerne going in as well. But yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, Nev. John.
Yeah, at Clethdim, John Evans Wilson, Clethdim. We just grow lentils down our way. Got a couple of varieties, hurricanes and hallmarks.
Oh, thanks, John. Craig, we move to you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, just just filling in a bit before, so just the old voice has gone away. So
So I missed that bit, Craig. Sorry.
I think there's two Craigs online. There's Craig Altman as well from AGF
Oh,
Seeds.
sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, Craig Altman.
Aha, there we go. Yep, thanks, Tony. Yeah, Craig Altman, AGF Seeds, representing AGF Seeds in all of South Australia. So a bit like Tony, cover a fair few, both in, pasture was brought up there before, but also in the cropping scene. So, yep. So, yeah, listening with interest. Makes it a bit hard being based in Victoria because I live in Horsham. Don't see much of you USA guys, so it's good to have the catch up online.
Adrian Borman. If you just want to give a bit of a rundown.
Yep. Adrian Borman, Sanderton, Pontheri, just north of Mannum, growing vetch, lupins, peas, and I don't know, and canola, but that's not really a pulse, but yeah. And yeah, all good.
Just had Brett Phillips, he just typed in the chat. So Brett Phillips, Langhorne Creek, grow beans, peas, lupins. Can hear the meeting, sorry, but I must have mic settings wrong. So he can hear us, but just can't talk at the moment. David Evans. You're on mute, David.
Just wanted to be the first to spot that. Well done, Brendan. David Evans from Grain Growers Limited. So been following a couple of these groups now for a couple of years. I find them really, really, really interesting and a really good way of keeping up with what's happening in the industry. So congratulations for taking it online. Much better than not having it at all.
Thanks, David. Jack.
Yeah, Jack Schultz from Sudan. This year we're just growing a few peas and a little bit of canola.
Yeah. Just working through the list here. So Sharon Starrick.
Hi everyone, I'm joined today by Beck as well. She's just making a coffee, so if that's what you can hear in the background. We farm near Pontheri, so near Adrian, and this year we've only got peas in, and we've also got some canola, but that's obviously not a pulse.
Thank you. Yeah, who up to? On the screen, it's got Belly.
Yeah, it's Craig Bell. There's too many Craigs already, so I've put Belly. Obviously, Elders agronomist out of Murray Bridge, covering anywhere near as the Swan Reach in the north, the Coomandook, out to Lamoureux, and a couple of jobs on KI, so covering pretty well all pulses like the other agros.
Thank you. Nathan.
Yeah, g'day, Nathan Zweck from Hart, and we grow lentils, beans and peas.
Okay, thank you. Troy?
Yeah, Troy from Newdoddy. We grow lupins and vetch and a little bit of canola.
Thanks, Troy. Now up to Simon. Simon Knott, can you hear us? What about Stuart?
Yeah, Stuart Ockerby here. I'm with SeedNet and up in Wagga Wagga. But yeah, I look after Victoria and South Australia as well. So yeah, and obviously a lot of the varieties that people on the line will be growing will be marketed by SeedNet. And yeah, so we've got most of the pulses covered and entering the lentil market next year. So yeah, always keen to listen and keep up to date with what's going on.
Well, thanks, Stuart. David Meagle. So I've just seen the chat here. David, Murray Bridge reseller for Ag Partners, also farm with lupins and vetch. So that's David. And then we've got Dale at Burbridge.
Yo, internet problems this morning. It's frozen.
Yep, we can hear you, Dale.
Oh, that's good. I can barely hear you. Yeah, out of Murray Bridge, lupins and vetch.
All right, and also on the line we have Tegan from Mallee Sustainable Farming.
Yeah, hey guys, Tegan Butler here. I do the media and communications at MSF. We've definitely had to go fully digital in light of the COVID-19. So yeah, thanks for everyone for showing up today, and I hope that I do the slides and everything correctly, so bear with us.
All right, so look, I'm just trying to flick through all the faces that I can see here. So I think I've got everyone. Now, if I haven't called you out, can you please just shout out and just introduce yourself? I apologise if I've missed you. Awesome. So thank you everyone for introducing yourself. It looks like we've got a good mix of pulse crops here. So we've got some beans, lupins, vetch, some lucerne, lentils and peas. So we've got quite a few to cover off, which is good, getting a bit of a mix right across the board. So look, we'll move straight into our guest presenter. We've got Dr Peter Boutsalis from Plant Science Consulting joining us today. So look, I'll pass the reins over to Peter to run through his session. And I encourage everyone to ask lots of questions on the way through.
Excellent. So firstly, can everyone hear me?
No worries.
Excellent. I've been shunted to my son's outdoor room because the dogs are going crazy inside. So I've just had to turn the heater on because it's absolutely freezing in here, and it's pants off Friday. So yeah, legs are a bit cold. Okay, so I'll just go to my presentation. I'd just like to present. Is that okay?
Yeah, I may need to make you host though. Hopefully.
To make me what? Sorry?
Make you a host.
Oh, okay.
To share. Hopefully
Right.
that works for you now.
Yep, now I'm the host. There's a sign that says I am the host. So is that okay now?
Yeah, we just have to start sharing the screen.
Should be good.
So if you just click on share screen, Peter.
Oh, okay.
The
let me
big
just
green.
I have to get the control stuff back. Oh, yep. Okay, so share screen. Share.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Okay. No, cancel that. Okay. Are we good to go now? Okay. So.
All good, Peter.
Excellent. Right, let's go. So I'd like to present today some information on how the DIMs are distributed, understanding Clethdim resistance, so it's quite unique, different to other Group A herbicides. Also compare and the addition of or combination of Clethodim plus Butroxydim. Also adjuvants and Clethodim choice, and some resistance testing to help determine what how we can use these herbicides more efficiently. Now, pulses are, I'll just move on. Have to try and work out how we move here to the next slide. It's not responding to go to the next slide with the arrows or the shift bar, so I have to try and work out how to do that. Yep, okay. So we've got information on ryegrass resistance tests from all over the country, and all those spots there, every single point there represents a single paddock that we have entered, collected weed seeds, and moved on to the next paddock. And that's part of a GRDC funded project which is ending in the end of this month, and hopefully it'll be refunded by next month. So we know where the resistance hotspots are, and where DIMs are still working. And sometimes there's a fair bit of difference between what we're seeing in terms of resistance and also what growers are seeing as part of resistance as well. So we're trying to work out, reasons why, and we'll go through those. But yeah, that's a fair bit of country there, and the next lot of surveys, which hopefully will be funded from starting from middle of this year, we'll be looking at that area again in a different way. But this is not a part of the conversation for now. So, now where we visited the SA Mallee in 2017, we went to about 50 to 60 paddocks in that very small area out of a larger survey. And we collected ryegrass just before harvest. We germinated them the following year at exactly this time, and at the current time we've got thousands of pots testing survey samples from Eyre Peninsula and southern Victoria. So we sprayed them, grew them outside, sprayed them outside, and assessed them after spraying with Clethodim at 2 rates, 250 and 500 mils per hectare, to see what the dose response effect would be. We used Adelaide water, which is good water, good quality water, no other herbicides in the tank, so optimum spraying conditions, and very good coverage. So we really understand that whatever survives our system is clearly resistant. Here's another shot of ones from Eyre Peninsula, and on the left-hand side of the 250 mil rate, and on the right-hand side 500 mil rate. The ones down the back, the green down the back, is the lower Eyre Peninsula, and the ones in the front are the upper Eyre Peninsula. So there even hoe grass works, so you can understand why Clethdim would be really active on spraying those weeds. But just to give you an indication of how we do the tests, really. So if we go to all of the regions that we've surveyed, up the top I've put the Mallee, your area that we surveyed in 2017, and surprisingly we found a quite low level resistance across the board, even to herbicides such as Axial. So what that number means there, 18%, is the percentage of ryegrass samples that were confirmed resistant out of that survey for that year. So for Clethdim 250 mils, we only found that 3% of the ryegrass samples exhibited resistance to Clethdim, increasing the rate to 500 mils. We killed basically everything apart from 1%. So we got really good control with both of those rates of Clethdim in outdoor grown ryegrass. So it's indicating that on the whole, there's not a lot of resistance to Clethdim when we use the random approach. Doesn't mean that there's very little resistance. It means that we couldn't detect it. Compare that to some of the other regions, you can see that we've detected much higher levels of resistance to Clethdim. So I would probably estimate that the effect that we're seeing with 250 mils of Clethdim is more closely to what you guys would be seeing in the paddock sprayed with 500 mils if there's any kind of stress in that paddock, be it frost, shading, other stresses. So our plants are sprayed under healthy conditions, but they are tough outdoor grown plants. We don't grow them inside a glass house. In some areas, the level of Clethdim resistance is lower than the level of glyphosate resistance, and that is a little bit scary, and it brings things into perspective. So that's what we're seeing, not a lot of resistance, and that's why in your pulse crops, you should be able to get very high levels of control. So a little bit of background. Research to date has shown that both Clethdim and Butroxydim, if it's resistant, it's a target site resistance. So and that is the only mechanism we've identified. But a lot of growers say, well, if we increase the dim rate, we get better control. So isn't that what we've learned from metabolic resistance? And the answer is no. And I'll explain to you exactly why that's the case. Also, in the past few years, we're getting a lot of Clethdim formulations out there. And it's always really important to stick to reputable brands from reputable companies and not try and save a few dollars by buying Clethdim from that's lower cost, because that usually equates to lower quality, and that equates to greater weed survival. And the same can also be said for the oils that go along with Clethdim. And I'll show you the following photo. So this is a photo that we did last year, where we had a so we had increasing rates of Clethodim. The pot on the left in all three photos is the untreated, and from left to right is increasing rate of Clethodim. And you can see that the superior adjuvant on the top there is Hasten, and you can see that even at rates below the field rate, we were able to get excellent control of susceptible ryegrass. Then we had a weak adjuvant, and it was just a coated product, so we don't know what it was, but you can see that there was significant survival at the lower rates of Clethdim compared to not adding any adjuvant at all. So there wasn't a lot of difference actually. So it really highlights that you need to stick to reputable, you're trying to do everything right, stick to reputable products, and you can't go wrong with respect to losing activity of the herbicide. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this situation here where you've got, this is a canola crop, and there's ryegrass that's been sprayed with Clethdim, and we've got healthy plants, we've got plants that are dead, and everything in between. So there's lots of responses to the herbicide. So, you know, how do we explain why isn't it black or white? Like you've either got dead plants or live plants. So there's a lot of variation in the control level. So we'll go through and try and explain why. So this is the only slide I've got on a little bit of molecular biology. So all the DIM herbicides and the FOP herbicides bind to this enzyme called ACCase. And there's a location on that actual enzyme, which is the binding pocket, so where all the DIM herbicides bind. And those 7 areas in red are different locations at the binding site where the DIM herbicides bind. Those red areas there indicate where changes have been identified. And if there's a change at one of those locations, it will give you FOP and or DIM resistance. Depending which mutation is present will determine what group A resistance you've got. And the mutations that we identified first, they gave FOP resistance, they're the more common ones. But what we're seeing now more and more of is the ryegrass that's resistant to the DIM herbicides. They're starting to show up some of the more rare of those mutations, which are also giving strong DIM resistance. So depending which mutation you've got will determine what resistance you've got. And you shouldn't, and I'll show you information soon, you don't have one mutation in a paddock. If you've got resistance, you usually got a whole bag of mutations, and that's why you get different responses to Clethdim from plants highly resistant to plants that are a very weak resistance. Also, I'll show you soon that ryegrass can have resistance can have two of those mutations in the same site. And what that happens is that really changes the structure of that binding site, and the DIMs just don't bind, and you get extremely high levels of resistance. So that's where you start to see resistance to things like 1.5, 2 litres of Clethdim or Clethdim Butroxydim not doing very much at all. That's because you've just completely changed that binding site at all. So ryegrass, our two major weeds are ryegrass and wild radish, and both of those occur in your area. They have a feature that other weeds don't have, and that is they are obligate outcrossers, and that means they must cross-pollinate to produce viable seed. So if you get a wild radish plant and stick it in your lounge room and ensure no pollen comes in from another source, that ryegrass plant will produce a whole heap of pollen, but no seed. So what it means is that if you've got plants with different resistances next to each other, those resistances will be combined in the next generation, and it will increase the level of resistance. So that'll mean more difficult to control with the DIM herbicides. Same with wild radish, we're getting more complex resistance, high levels of resistance to individual herbicides, and also cross resistance too. So resistance to group B herbicides, group F herbicides, group I herbicides, because they're combining together. So I've just, this time I'm showing this is my resistance equation. So I've shown you've got 7 mutation sites, those red regions in that cartoon picture I showed earlier. And you've got different mutations possible at each site. Then you can get combinations of mutations at the site. And you can get different combinations of resistant mutations in individuals. So when you combine all those together, you get very complex structural changes at that group A binding site and loss of group A's. And there are farmers out there that I've said to them, you've lost your group A's. You cannot use any group A's anymore because 2 litres of Clethdim in our pot trials is not controlling that ryegrass, because they've just, at each application stage, they have allowed plants to survive and cross-pollinate and accumulate those mechanisms together. So that's what's happened there. They're extreme cases, they're not common, but I have got seed that's that resistant. So let's have a look at we did some work about 15, 20 years ago now at Roseworthy, where we looked at 3 neighbouring paddocks and very closely investigated DIM resistance. So, or group A resistance. So we've got 3 paddocks there. And what we did is we transected those paddocks, and that every 10 metres we collected a single ryegrass plant and kept that seed separate, cleaned it during summer, and the following year we tested that ryegrass seed with verdict. So verdict, if plants survive verdict, they're also target site resistant. So that was the main herbicide used back 20 years ago in that situation. And what we found was we got completely different responses in neighbouring paddocks. So paddock 1, we found each of those in colours represents a single plant that has survived verdict. The colours represent different mutations we identified when we took those surviving plants into the lab and conducted DNA tests with them. So the paddock on the left, we found only, 5 or 6 plants there, and more of those were congregated around the gate, so indicating that perhaps we had some movement of resistance into that paddock by machinery or other sources as well. So in the middle of the paddock, we only found 1 or 2. The middle paddock, we found a lot more plants that were resistant. And the paddock on the right, we found no resistance to verdict at all, 0. So 3 paddocks, 3 stories. The colours represent what we found in terms of mutations. So the most common mutation we found was 2078. That mutation gives you strong FOP resistance and very weak DIM resistance. So if we had sprayed that ryegrass with 500 mils of Clethdim, we would not have seen any of those 2078 mutations. There would have been all the other colours, but not those red ones. So it would have been very low. We found a few plants, the blue with 2041 mutation, that starts to give you a little bit higher cletho resistance. And then we found plants with double mutations. So the green spots indicate an individual that had 2 mutations of that light. And so that one, spraying it with 500 mils of Clethdim wouldn't touch it, and so forth. You can see the other colours as we move down that system there, that we had different mutations. And we even had a couple plants down the bottom, a yellow spot and a lilac spot, where we found 3 mutations in the same actual individual. Those guys would not be touched with 2 litres of Clethodim. So they would survive, and if they weren't controlled, they would then start to increase the level of resistance in that paddock if Group A herbicides were repeated. So that's why late season practices and seed capture are very important, because if you can capture those guys, you stop resistance, you stop it from moving forward and becoming harder and harder to control. So that's looking at 3 paddocks. Then we did a survey of the mid-north of South Australia, and we've got data from 3 surveys that we conducted: 1998, 2003, and the other date, which I can't see because I've got you guys, your faces there, 2013, I think. And so what we found was that back in, so we've got seed from all those survey times. So we grew them all out at the same time, sprayed them with, I believe it was herbicide about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and collected the survivors, took them to the lab and conducted DNA tests. And what we found, that back in 1998, all of those mutations were present in ryegrass. So they've always been there. They've always been there. Some are much more common than others, and the ones that give you strong DIM resistance are extremely rare. But after decades of Group A herbicide use, we're slowly selecting and increasing numbers. So what we found in 1998, they were all there, but we found very few plants with double mutations. As we moved across time, we found more and more plants with double mutations, which meant that plants had survived, different mutations, they cross-pollinated, they produced double mutations, they're not being controlled with 500 mils of Clethdim, they're setting seed, they're combining, and so over time, as we've all heard, it's becoming more difficult to control ryegrass with the DIMs. That's because it's becoming more complex, because these mutations are accumulating more and more, and we're allowing them to set seed and increase the problem. So high rates of Clethodim do improve control. Factor Butroxydim sometimes improves control on Clethdim resistant ryegrass, and that depends on the mutation, and you won't really know unless you do a DNA test or do a simple herbicide resistance test. But sometimes Clethdim is better than Factor Butroxydim, so the flip is also sometimes true. So in terms of label strength of DIM, the strongest one that you guys can use in pulses is Butroxydim or Factor plus Clethodim. That's the highest DIM loading that will control ryegrass that's registered. So, I mean, here's a photo just showing from a single paddock. It's one population, and as we increase the rate of Clethdim, we are improving control. And we've got there that in this case, factor 180 grams is doing a bloody good job compared to say 500 mils of Clethdim. That's one particular case, but it does vary. What I didn't have in that, the slide's a little bit old, and I didn't have select plus 180 grams of factor, but I would assume that in that particular population, we would kill that population outright with that combination. So I've compared here a whole heap of different populations with 2 rates of factor and 3 rates of Clethdim. And there you can see that the highest loading of a dim is 1,000 mils of Clethdim. And you can see that we're getting very high levels of control with 1,000 mils of Cletho. Factor 180 is not always better than Clethodim, and even the first one up the right, population 954, the top one, 180 grams of factor, we got 83% control. 500 mils of Cletho, we got 100% control. So don't always think that factor's better. And I didn't have the combination there because it just wasn't something that was used when I did that trial. But just to show you the variation and increasing the rate of a dim herbicide there from say 300 mils of select to 500 mils, how much we improve control. We can go from survival to complete control in some cases, both for factor and Clethodim. So we're just trying to understand. There's lots of other reasons why we get poor control, and we've got stress and frost. You know, yesterday and today there's frost all over the place, and applying Clethdim under these conditions can be quite challenging, quite difficult for it to work, especially if the plants are starting to get into that mid-tillering stage. As they start to tiller, plus frost equals less efficacy by that herbicide. So using the best herbicides, the best adjuvant is the way to move forward, and hitting it with the highest dim loading. And you guys growing pulses, you can go much higher and get very good control. So how to get the best out of Clethodim and Butroxydim. So we're not identifying a lot of resistance out there in our random GRDC funded random weed surveys, and that indicates that poor control is not always resistant. There are other factors involved, and the dim herbicides are quite temperamental. What we've identified is that when you target young weeds like 3-leaf, 1-tiller, even if they're resistant, you can often either kill them outright with a high dim load or seriously affect them so the crop competition takes over. Once they start to get into that mid-tillering stage, they are not touched. So targeting young weeds is very important. So saying, oh, I'm just going to let them all germinate and hit them with one hit, that means that you will have survivors if you've got some weak resistance in there. Warmer temperatures, we know, increase dim activity. So the earlier you can go, the higher the chance that it's not frosty. Conditions effect is much greater. We don't have very good data on frost, but our current thinking is that frost before and after can reduce efficacy of the dim herbicides. And at the moment, we're actually growing some ryegrass, and we want to get it to the right stage. And then we're going to take some of it to a high frost area. Others will leave it at the weight campus, so even though it'll be cold, it won't be frosty. And we want to see how ryegrass growing at 2 locations, how it responds to dim herbicides when we spray them at the same time in the lab there. So we'll get some more information. I'm hoping to have a lot more accurate information in a few months' time. Using reputable products, like I mentioned earlier, using good quality water and ammonium sulfate. Ammonium sulfate helps buffer, precipitate out positive ions, cations. We know with glyphosate, it also helps the herbicide work. So it's not only the buffering of the water, it also actually helps glyphosate move faster within the plant. We believe it might be doing the same with dim herbicides also. So your highest loading that's on the label is your 180 grams of factor plus 500 mils of Clethdim. That's the highest label rate. We found that often, 1,000 mils of Cletho, which is not on the label, is a very good herbicide as well. So it's good to mix those up a bit. Reducing the important thing is to reduce selection pressure, so you're not reaching those extreme cases where you've got 2 or 3 target site mutations in the same individual that you cannot control with any kind of any rate of dim herbicide. So using your knockdowns, using good pre-emergent herbicides. There are new pre-emergent herbicides coming onto the market. Next year, Ultra will be registered, and that is another mode of action. It's a group, I forget what, group E, I think. So that one is going to give you, I've tested it, and it controls multiple resistant ryegrass, it controls barley grass, it controls brome grass, and some other broadleaf weeds as well. So it's going to be a very important herbicide, only selective in pulses. So it'll be a great addition to try and really get that first germination out. So when you're spraying your herbicides in crop, you'll have fewer plants to control and better control next year. And also those seed capture. So if you don't have any seed set, then you will really never increase resistance. The other beauty about pulse crops is that you can spray top or crop top with paraquat, and that is such an important tool to get those guys that have survived all the herbicides and any late germinators. You can take them out with paraquat, sterilize that seed, and make sure that next year you're only relying on the seed bank that was there from 2 years ago. So a very important factor. I heard also someone mention growing vetch. There is a new group G herbicide that I just saw on Twitter the other day, and I know a little bit about it. I think it's called Reflex from, I forget which company it's from. It might be BASF. And not only is it active on broadleaf weeds in vetch, but it has been shown to have some decent ryegrass activity as well. So that's one to all have a look at as well. So we offer some testing, and a lot of you guys have been conducting testing through Plant Science Consulting, just to be able to identify if there is resistance present in the paddock. We can test seed and we can test plants as well, and we're starting to receive quite a few plants at the current time using the quick test. So here's a typical table from a farmer that we conducted a test, and it showed that with Verdict, he had 70% survival, so a lot of resistance to the FOP herbicides. But with 500 mils of Clethdim, he was able to obtain complete control. We were able to obtain complete control, but at a lower rate, there was resistance there. So you want to make sure that you get those guys with the registered rate of Cletho, so they don't survive. Because those guys that survive 250 mils, they'll cross-pollinate, and if we captured that seed and tested it the following year with 500 mils, we will definitely have survivors. He had resistance to Hisar, but not Intervix, and also a little bit of glyphosate and no trophoron resistance as well. So yeah, that's the importance of a test. Is it identifies where you are, what your baseline is, and where you need to, what is your most effective strategy to start for that particular season. Yep. So yeah, that's it for the presentation. I wanted to be short, sharp, and right to the point. Pulses offer a really strong weed control option because of the high rates of DIMs you can use. You've got, you can use, I believe, high rates of propyzamide as well. So you've got some pre-emergent herbicides that are highly effective, so you can really crash that population and make ryegrass struggle for that particular season. So I'll leave it there, and I welcome any questions.
Hey there, Craig Bell from Elders Murray Bridge. Quick question. You've looked at Hasten with Clethdim in all those tests. Have you looked at uptake?
Yep, uptake.
0.5%. Yep.
Uptake is very good. I would, if I was comparing 1% Hasten to 0.5% uptake, which I've done the comparison, uptake's a little bit weaker. So I'd say increasing the rate to 1% uptake would equalise it. That's what some of the trial work we found. So your 0.5% uptake is a little bit behind the ball to 1% Hasten.
Thanks. And quickly, looking at the Clethdim rate there, 250 compared to 500. I know there's a lot of advisors running around using a split mix of Clethodim and haloxyfop.
Yep.
That suggests that we should be just using the full rate of Cleth and still throwing a haloxy in if we want for some dual activity or something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Verdict there, your haloxyfop is there for your any self-sown cereals and any brome, barley grass, wild oats. The fops are better than the dims. The dims still work. Those high rates of dims are still effective on those other grasses, but the fops are highly effective at lower label rates on those other grasses, and the Clethodim is doing all the hard kicking for the high grass.
Peter, it's Tony Craddock here. Peter, I saw some stuff on Twitter that you're doing some work on ammonium sulfate and potential improvement of Clethodim with quite positive results. So it's confirming we're getting a bit of science behind the use of AMS. Did you want to comment on that at all?
Yep. Yeah, we're actually going to be doing a lot more work in the next few months, actually, Tony. So I have a lot more information on that. We're actually creating hard water, and we'll be comparing to see if ammonium sulfate is not only buffering and softening the water, but whether it's having an impact in driving the dim herbicide in faster and making it work. So I haven't got any new information at the current time, but as it's an important part, I thought I'd just do some of my own trials just to get some more information for you guys.
Yep.
Peter, Nev Kernick here, just on the AMS. Is it still the 1% rate then that you recommend, or is it a case of higher the better? And any comment on using UAN instead of AMS?
Yeah, that second question, I haven't done any tests, Nev, so I don't have any information on that one. We've only used, we used 2% liquid, or we haven't used the 1%, because I think on the label it's 1% of the granular one. We've only used 2% of a soluble product, and that's done the work, but I wouldn't expect there to be any difference between using 1% of the label rate of the soluble, the WG formulation.
Right.
Whether increasing the rate would improve control, I haven't actually done those trials, and that's something we'll be looking at as well. It's such a cheap way to get an improved control of a lot of herbicides.
Yeah, agreed.
We can do these trials. I can spend every hour of the year conducting all these trials and getting more information, but you also have to get some funding from somewhere. So that's why we're doing all these other tests as well, to try and give us some energy so we can do these when we have some quiet time.
For sure. Peter, while I've got you, I've got a couple other questions, if I may.
Yeah, shoot.
Right as we stand at the moment, we got ryegrass that is obviously getting bigger and bigger fairly quickly. We've just had 2 frosts.
Yep.
We're looking at, the first frost was pretty light, but today's was a bit heavier. We're looking at frost through into next week. how do you go about your decision-making process there, whether you just get in now while we've got a sunshiny day and take the hit on the 2 frosts, versus waiting until all those frosts have passed, which we're probably looking at 7 to 10 days, we can get back into it.
Right. Yeah, I was trying to have a quick look at my phone to see what the weather would be over the next few days. Yeah, I do this. So I know it's in theory. I would, if the frosts have just started and it looks like you're going to have quite a few frosts for the next week or so, I'd go in there now before the plant's highly stressed.
Right.
They are, if when it's cold, they are also growing very slowly. So if it's only a matter of waiting, say a week, and then you know that you can see some showers coming in a 5-6 days time where the overall temperature won't be as low, then it could be worth waiting for another few days, because when it's freezing, it's cold, they're not growing very fast at all as well. So it's basically looking at the forecast and seeing frosts have just started. I'd definitely go with that. Of course, use all those factors that I talked about to try and get the best performance. But if you've got a long string of frosts coming along, I wouldn't be spraying and knowing that I've got 5 frosts coming in a row, because you will have reduced control.
Okay, righto. The other one is timing with propyzamide. Normally I'd like to try and have that go out, immediately before a rain. So, if you can time it up all in together and have a nice bright shiny day just prior to rain and whack it all out at once. But how long will propyzamide sort of sit there before it needs to be washed through the profile?
It's very stable, so you can hang around there for quite a while before it won't break down.
Right.
So it's not like trophyrilin. So you can sit there for a while, and then it'll just wash down whenever the rain comes. Okay. So yeah, don't worry about it breaking down. And because you can use higher rates in your pulses, then you will maintain that good activity when it's activated.
Yep, righto. And just on that, have you seen any propyzamide damage in pulses?
I haven't, but I'm probably not the best person to ask about. I'm from the angle of damage to weeds, not damage to crops.
Okay, very cool.
Nev, I'll just check in there, Tony Craddock again. I've seen beans shortened by propyzamide. So just where you've got a missed bit, I've seen a difference in height, but it wasn't actually obvious damage as such. There was certainly some shortening there, but I don't think that it didn't seem like obvious damage, and we probably wouldn't have picked it up if we didn't have a mist strip.
Yep.
I guess experience is pulses are very tolerant of propyzamide. The one to watch is canola, and I think the Hart Field Day site did some trial work a few years ago looking at pre-emergent and also post-sowing pre-emergent, and also propyzamide applications after emergence. And the level, it doesn't happen always, but the risk of damage is higher when canola is actually sprayed after emergence. So yeah, but I think pulses have a fair level of tolerance.
Yeah.
Right, excellent. Thank you, Tony. No,
have we got any other questions there for Peter? Well, thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. It was fantastic, and some good insights into to group A resistance in ryegrass and that cross resistance, and just how to go about managing that to stop the spread.
Yep, and any new information I have, the first way I've publish it is by putting it on Twitter. So if you're not following me on Twitter, follow, and you get that information straight away. I actually tweeted some glyphosate resistant information yesterday, and then I thought I better tell Chris Preston about it, because I haven't told my boss about it yet. So the Twitter world knew about it before Chris did, because Chris is not on Twitter. So yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. That's been really good. Peter, I'm going to get you to hand your host rights back over to Tegan, because she's going to put a couple of things up on the screen. But look, Peter, thank you very much for that. That's been a really informative and really detailed, given us a very detailed understanding of Group A resistance and particularly the role that DIMs play in that. But also some really good tips, practical tips about getting the best out of our DIM herbicides that we, and under some pretty trying conditions which we're about to face, or started to face with the frost that's occurred in the last 2 days.
Yep.
So thank you.
Pleasure. I just got to work out now how to do this.
It's okay. I've reclaimed host from you, so you don't need to worry.
Thanks.
Tegan's in control. Look out.
Watch out.
Look, we'll move now into the session, looking at some issues and innovations. So you probably saw in the publicity emails to send a couple of photos in. We've got a couple of photos that's been sent through, and I'm going to get Tegan to put them up on the screen. And we'll just pre-warning you, Sharon Starrick, we're going to get you to talk to your innovation that you've sent a photo in. And I've got so Sharon, what can you tell us about this machine?
So this is our inoculator, legume inoculator that we set up this year. Can't take the credit for it because the idea actually came off of Twitter. So thanks to Twitter. Pretty basic to set up, but really helped in terms of making sure the rate was right and that the operators didn't get covered in inoculum. It's really just an old shuttle, a 44-gallon drum that's been cleaned, and it's just a really cheap firefighting unit. The 2-inch hose that you can see there actually recirculates. So what that does is actually stops the inoculum from actually getting lumpy or settling out, and it definitely did the job. The only change we would make, so we've got a little tap, you can see in the second photo there, we've got a little tap for the outlet hose, which we put by the auger to inoculate the peas as they're coming out of the bin. Before they're loaded on the truck. So that's the one that governs the rate. We would put a second tap in at the end of the hose to actually turn the inoculum off. So as an easy way, rather than actually you getting your rate set up right and then all of a sudden, oh dear, you need to stop it. So we'd put a second tap in. And in terms of feeding the inoculum in at the base of the fuel bin where the auger is, we actually just taped a piece of PVC pipe and threaded the hose through it. So it actually gets right to the base of the fuel bin. So pretty simple stuff, but made life a lot easier, quicker, and less stressful for the operators.
Excellent stuff. Sharon, that's great. Any questions or comments from the group in terms of how, to either Sharon or how they're achieving inoculation? No, that's okay. Thanks very much for. Here we go. A question from Philippa Lawson: Are people inoculating each year, or is it on an as needs basis? Any comments there?
For us, it's definitely it's probably on an as needs basis, but because we probably spread our rotations out as much as possible, it probably does end up whenever we have legumes in the rotation.
Okay. Yeah. So amongst my clients, when we're dealing with alkaline soils, peas, beans, lentils, those sorts of things, where in alkaline soils, if we're growing one of those classes of legumes every 3 to 4 years, we don't actually bother inoculating. But where you're starting to move into more acidic soils, we make inoculation a more regular thing. So where beans are being pushed into some of the more acidic pHs, their inoculum survival isn't as good, and we're making it a regular thing to do rather than a spasmodic thing. So the more hostile your soil types, probably the more regular you need to be about it. Craig Altman
just an update on. Oh, sorry, go.
I was just going to say that Craig has just asked a question. Craig, I'll just find that question again. So you go ahead, Brendan.
I was just going to say, last year when we had looked at some inoculation stuff at Coomandook on Andrew's property, we were looking at different rates of product, so from a standard rate, double rate, and the nil treatment. This is on a soil with a pH of about 6.5. And we definitely seen a bigger increase and a greater level of nodules on the plants with a double rate of treatment compared to a nil or a standard rate, but that never correlated to an increase in yield.
Craig was just asking before, is everyone checking inoculation or nodulation this year? I personally have been out and had a look at nodulation in a number of crops where we were concerned about whether inoculation was effective or not, and I've seen pretty good nodulation so far in the limited number of crops I've looked at. Any others been out and checked nodulation so far this year?
Fuck, it's only just started.
Yeah, it's quite early, isn't it? Yeah.
Sorry, did you hear that?
Yeah, we did.
Sorry.
It is quite early, and you make a good point there, Steve, in that it is just the start of it. You need a bit of a root system there to judge it. But a few of these lentil crops are now nearing on 4 and 5 node, where they've been early sowing in some of the warmer soils. We're getting a good handle on nodulation already.
Yeah.
All right, let's move the conversation to the next slide, I reckon, Tegan.
Sure.
So this has been sent in by James Foreman from Palmer. For the benefit of the Coomandook group, there's been quite a bit of farmer work done, as well as work by the Murray Plains Farmers group, looking at gibberellic acid on various pulses in our district to see if it does have a role, and will it increase dry matter, will it increase vetch harvestability when it comes to haymaking. And James is an apology for today, but he sent this photo through of vetch plants that he's just dug up recently, and his question to me was which one received the gibberellic acid, and I think we can possibly work that one out. Others in the group have you gone with gibberellic acid on any pulses this year? What about you, Adrian? Adrian Borman, have you used any gibberellic acid this year?
Yeah, just trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, we only went 4 grams in the liquid stream. I think James would have went 10 grams, talking to him earlier. You couldn't visually see the difference that he's seen, but there's still a few plants that are a bit more elongated than normal. So yeah, still had some result.
Yep. So the experience in the Murray Plains area last year, and the Murray Plains Farmers Group did some really good trial work on this last year. They certainly saw visual responses. They actually got more visual responses where it went out in liquid stream than it did post-emergent in terms of the actual growth rate. yeah, cuts at the end, you know, so forage cuts at the end didn't increase with gibberellic acid use, but it seemed to bring on the spring flush a lot earlier. So it sort of had us thinking that perhaps in a grazing proposition, it could, and when growth is quite slow during, you know, the cold of winter, this could bring on earlier dry matter production, but it may not increase overall dry matter production. So, but I'll just preface that by saying we have had some pretty dry finishes in the Murray Plains area in the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see if this year we get an actual overall dry matter response. So yeah, it's something that we're playing around with on the Murray Plains area. David Meagle, you're online as well. David, have you continued a bit of gibberellic acid use amongst your clients this year? No, that's okay. David might have snuck off. All right.
Tony, Andrew Hansen here. I used some gibberellic acid last year on some sown pasture, vetch and barley, and it definitely did, where I sprayed it, it definitely did increase dry matter initially, but I think by the end of the season, and I did it on some late sown pasture just to try and get some more biomass early for stock feed. And I think by the end of the season, what I didn't spray probably produced as much in the end, a bit on the same as what you were saying.
Yep. If you think about where the practice came from, it came from high rainfall pastures, and the aim was to increase winter production when things were cold and not growing very well. So yeah, the overall dry matter production at this stage we haven't measured it yet. The other purpose that the Murray Plains farmers have been finding is that it's been making vetch hay cutting more efficient. It's changed the plant architecture a bit, and they're actually picking up more in the make it more upright, and they're picking up more vetch in the hay cutting operation. So you know, it may actually increase hay yields without increasing overall dry matter, just by changing the plant's architecture or the way it stands up, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, Tony Craddock from Elders. We've done it later, not this early for that reason, trying to just get some standard height in the vets to be able to get under with the cutter bar, and seeing reasonable results, nothing tested with or without, I suppose, but yeah, never this early, of course, like James has done.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Belly. All right, so I don't think we've got any more photos, but has anyone else got an issue or innovation that they'd like to share or pose to the group? No, that's okay. Look, let's leave the issues and innovation section there. Probably it's a really good time to talk through management reminders or things that we've got to be aware of between now and our next meeting. And look, I'll just start off by saying, well, one thing on the agenda is obviously grass herbicides. That's happening at this moment, or maybe as a result of Peter's talk, might be delayed a bit given the frosty conditions. I've got a lot of clients that have already put out their first grass herbicide in pulses, which and it seems to be performing quite well. The other thing that we've probably got to turn our attention to is whether broadleaf control and weed control is on the agenda. Is it necessary, and what are the options? Hopefully, and as we've talked about in our group, what we try and do is avoid post-emergent broadleaf control by using a sound pre-emergent strategies, but we do get caught. You know, often we will see broadleaf weeds come through, and there are some limited options in some crops. Unfortunately, for those who are growing beans and vetch, there's not a lot post-emergent that you've got available to you, except for a product called EcoPar. And EcoPar is, I guess I call it a bit of a scorched earth approach to weed control. It burns off the vetch pretty well, burns off the weeds as well, and the idea is the vetch comes back. So I sort of treat it more of a salvage operation. And you know, it is certainly very visual where EcoPark goes out. So beans and vetch, not too many options there, but hopefully the simazines, the metribuzins, the turbines that you've used mean that you don't have to look at post-emergent broadleaf control. With lentils, and I think there was only one other lentil grower in the group, the decision now is whether we use Brodel or Broadstrike if weeds are out there. But John Edmonds-Wilson, I don't know that John's still there, but John's got IMI-tolerant lentils, so his decision will be whether he puts an IMI herbicide, an Intervix or Intercept over his lentils or not. So that's a particular one. Lupins. So what are people using in the area on the number of lupin growers in the area? What are people using on their lupins for post-emergent control?
Yeah, we use a bit of Brodel.
Yep.
Tony, yeah, we use Brodel metribuzin.
Yep. Andrew, Brodel metribuzin is often a step up from Brodel itself. How are you going with crop effect there? You know, I've had a love-hate relationship with that particular mix. Can you enlighten us on what sort of rates you're using, and are there any tips or traps associated with managing that crop effect?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, Tony. We've had a few issues with burning crops. Growing some of the newer varieties. So we've got Bateman in this year. We've been growing durian for a little while, and I think Bateman, well, I only had Bateman in last year with the durian, and I think the Bateman maybe a little bit more tolerant. Getting in, so rates, we're sort of around the 100 mils, 100 grams. So 100 mils of Brodel, 100 grams of metribuzin, up to we've used up to 120 and 120, and you definitely see where you double up with that 120 rate, and I guess that's why we're going with the newer varieties. They seem to be a little bit more tolerant to a bit higher rates of metribuzin, and we're chasing radish. So we've found what actually helps. We're using turbine in our lupins, so the radish plants that we're hitting are smaller, and that's important, especially with the Brodel. The smaller the radish plants, the better. So using some turbine up front is controlling those early radish plants, and then we're sort of targeting more later ones with the metribuzin Brodel, which gives us a better result.
Yep. That's good. Anyone else got any tips or traps with post-emergent broadleaf control in lupins?
We're using pretty similar to what's been mentioned. If I'm chasing radish, I'll go metribuzin, but in stressful conditions, I've really knocked some lupins around. In other areas where Eclipse still works, if you can still get it, obviously does a good job, but you got to watch your group B resistance. Last couple of years, I actually toyed around with Brodel Post-Sowing pre-M to get that residual effect, and had really good results. So that's been something we've looked at a bit more. So yeah.
So Craig, sorry, Tony.
Go ahead.
So Craig, you're finding you're getting more crop effect if there's frost events around? That's what we seem to find.
Yeah, I think it was only over the road from your place, and it was a slow growth year, and I think from memory we'd actually doubled up the metribuzin. Went hard, it went a bit early, and then went back again with more, and that was where the result was just too much. We knew there was going to be a risk, and we probably wiped out 25% of the lupins. So yeah, quite severe effect.
So you're using turbine as well up front?
Bearings, that one didn't have, I don't think, that was simazine and propisamide. I'll say mixed result. It's like this year, any of the Group C's worked really well this year because it's been wet.
Yeah.
If it's dry, though, you can almost leave them all in a bag, I think.
Yeah. No, I think there's some good points there that that damage can be related to one, rate, but also plant stresses. And if plants are under stress by frost or dry, or the lupins on a little bit of limier ground, you'll tend to find that crop effect from that Metribuzin and Brodal mixture tends to be a lot higher. Belly, you mentioned a very interesting emerging trend is the use of Brodal post-sowing pre-emergent, and I've got a number of clients, using up to about 90 mils of Brodal post-sowing pre-emergent on lupins, and maybe up to 50 mils on vetch and sometimes lentils. But it seems to be working quite well in terms of providing a film of residual herbicide over the soil surface, and getting reasonably good control of some of those brassica and cruciferous weeds.
Yeah, I think the residual activity is just far better than what we seem to get in that post application, particularly on cape weed and a few weeds like that. Admittedly, we've been going straight to 100 mils on lupins. I did see an area last year where the boom hung out over into vetch crop next door or in the same paddock, and it was very clean. It was very checked, but a decent end of the season I don't think would have affected the vetch, and that might have been 80 mils over. Yeah, surprising the job. Well, very good job, of course.
Yeah. I must admit, I get more calls about what's affecting this vetch or lentil crop from post-sowing pre-emergent Brodal, and I get calls on most other things. It can be quite visual, but as you've indicated, Belly, that it does tend to grow out of it. But it does create a little bit of conversation between growers and agronomists in the early stages of crop emergence. All right, and you did mention Eclipse as well, and I'm still a user of Eclipse where I'm confident that we haven't got a high level of Group B resistance. It is quite a useful thing on radish, providing Group B resistance isn't a major issue there. But I guess the tips and traps associated with Eclipse is definitely no wetters or oils if you're using Eclipse on lupins, which is different to the cereal situation. Okay, let's move from lupins onto peas. So we've got quite a number of pea growers within the group, particularly on the Murray Plains. Post-emergent broadleaf control. I'll put it out there. I love peas for this reason: is that Brodal and MCPA amine mixes are quite a useful mix post-emergence for picking up again brassica and a few other weeds. Rates of around between 125 and 150 of Brodal, mixed with, if you're talking MCPA amine 750, mixed with between 83 and 100 mils. But I find that Brodal MCPA on peas is quite a useful and robust mix. So if you've got broadleaf weeds that have come through the Metribuzin or the Diaron, simazine Diaron that you might have used on those peas, keep in mind Brodal MCPA amine, not LVE, is a pretty good alternative. Any other comments on pea broadleaf weed control that anyone wants to make?
If I can make one comment, Tony, I tried to send a message to everyone, but it didn't work. Tyrexor is a new Group G from BASF, and I believe it's going to have it's selective in pulses. So it's a new mode of action for use in. So it's one looking at the label for that one. I don't know a lot about it, but I have tested it on like weeds, and it's rapid, and it also may have some useful ryegrass activity as well. So that's a completely new Group G that is potentially available for pulses. It might be on the label. I just couldn't find the label to download on my phone just before, but I think it's also the US label definitely has pulses registered, so I assume it'd be the same pulses. So that could be a very exciting use, especially where you're starting to see some Group B resistance and some Group I resistance.
Excellent, Peter. That's a good heads up on what's going to be a pretty useful product for us, I reckon. Okay. Happy to pea growers. You're happy to we move on from peas? Okay. So the only other one that I'll mention is that I did mention earlier, but IMI-tolerant crops. So your IMI-tolerant lentils, and now there's Bendoc beans out there. Any of the canopy group growing Bendocs at all?
Tony, we're growing a few Bendocs, but we're actually not growing them for their herbicide resistance. There's just been some work that in sub 3 tonne yield potential, that Bendocs are actually performing a bit better than Semiras. So we've basically just got them up against Semiras just to compare yield.
Oh, that's interesting. That's yeah. I hadn't heard that, but I must go through the SARDI results to well, the.
So it sort of shows up in the MBT trials.
Yeah.
That you know, in sub 3 tonne yield potential, Bendocs are performing pretty well against Semiras.
Yep. Thank you, Craig. We'll see you soon. Yeah, with in terms of Bendoc beans, does give you the opportunity to use an Interfix or intercept over them. So and again, this is about, you know, it'll be coming up decision-making time on whether that's required or not. Obviously, it's starting to get to be that we can use an IMI herbicide on just about any class of crop these days. So it seems to be a fairly major event to plan away around residues, but it is an option for a lot of growers. We tend to grow them in the mid-north, mainly where we've got problem weeds. So we've got a lot of tear or wild vetch problems. That really limits what we can do with pulses in our area, and we're finding that the IMI-tolerant lentils and now the beans will fit in quite well for trying to manage tears or wild vetch in those crops as well. So yeah, it'll be decision-making time fairly soon as to whether to include it in with the grass herbicide or do a separate application on as far as intercept goes. All right.
Only quickly, there's obviously a couple of MEP varieties coming out too, isn't there? Alstar and Castar or whatever they're to be called, I think. I don't know where the tolerance sits, but they'll be around next year.
Yeah, we'll have even more to choose from, and obviously we've got some IMI-tolerant oats that have hit the marketplace this year as well. So, but more on a soak up the residue basis rather than using IMIs in them. So, yeah, it's a useful tool. I'd love to see more Group C tolerant lines, or fast track of some Group C tolerant lines, you know, so we can use high rates of metribuzin, metribuzin particularly, rather than more Group Bs. But that's me. Still a useful tool.
I think the same. I think we're just going to look at them for their residual use rather than the use of the chemistry in the crop. Anyway.
Yep. That having good safe soakers after using them in other crops is a very good option to have. Yeah. Excellent. All right. So other management tips and reminders. I guess for the Coomandook group who are growing beans, I guess it's probably standard practice through your way when you're going out with the grass herbicide to include some tebuconazole fungicide with the grass herbicide to keep Cercospora at bay. Would I be right there? Yep, I can see a few nods. So yeah, certainly don't forget that tebuconazole or fungicide addition with your grass herbicide, because this is the window, I guess, for keeping Cercospora down in crops. And it's probably, if we end up with a wetter winter, we'll have to be reasonably diligent about monitoring bean crops for ascochyta too. We've got Samira out there, which is head and shoulders above the Farahs and the Fiestas of the past, but still keep an eye out for ascochyta is going to be quite important. And for those who take it, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Tony. So you'd be recommending tebuconazole over something like a early carbendazole, because carbendazole has activity on Cercospora too?
It does. It's more about, I tend to save my carbendazole up for chocolate spot time. So, and when you're looking at Cercospora time, chocolate spot isn't really going to be an issue because we haven't got heavier canopy. So my preference is for tebuconazole at this stage, and to look at carbendazole as potentially part of the chocolate spot mix as we get to late winter, early spring for pre-canopy closure for mainly geared around botrytis type diseases. Mm-hmm. But that's probably a personal preference. Yep. And it's cheap.
Tony, Nev here. Teb at 145 mil rate?
Yep. Minimum 145. I'll tend, because it's so cheap, I'll often go up to 200 just to, because it costs about 20 cents extra. But yeah, minimum 145.
Tony, have you seen any burning with Tebi on beans?
Yeah, you can get some touch up at times. You can also get it with Veritas as well, so which is another fungicide that often gets mixed with grass herbicides for ascochyta and botrytis diseases. But yeah, there is, you do see it under certain circumstances every now and then. Yep.
Just quickly. Sorry, I do a bit the same with Teb on beans, the few I do. While Peter's there, what reduced efficacy we're going to see with that Teb thrown in with our Clethodim, do you think?
Yeah, there can be some reduction. We have identified a little bit of reduction in it. Yeah, we have. Yeah, did some trials for some companies, and we saw a little bit of a reduction in the efficacy of the grass herbicide.
We can compensate with rate then?
Yes.
So yeah, I guess the message there is if you're mixing tebuconazole with grass herbicides, let's keep the rate robust. Yep. Okay, and I don't think there's any chickpea growers in the group, so banging on about the importance of early ascochyta control will probably fall on, probably a bit irrelevant, but if anyone's snuck in some chickpeas and within the group, or joined the group late and growing chickpeas, this will certainly be a year to watch out for ascochyta chickpeas, and I would rate it as one of the most devastating pulse diseases that we've got that we face. So don't let your guard down as far as ascochyta control. And this is probably the time, or it's coming up to time to put out the first fungicide there.
So can I ask, Nev, you've been growing chickpeas for a few years now, and you're not growing them now. What's just sick of them? Just too hard?
Here, Nev.
Yeah, now we're right. Zoom newbie. So the biggest problem was definitely around the cleanliness of the paddock for the following year. Just couldn't do a decent job on that last tidy up with paraquat, as a topping. The yield last year, we grew monarchs last year, and the yield was actually not too bad. Probably, set around that 1.6 tonne per hectare. So wasn't overly upset about the yield, and some really good solid patches in the paddock. But when you compare that to a 3-ton bean crop last year, and we've still got the chickies sitting in the silo at the moment, waiting for the price to do something. Yeah, it was a bit of a case of, well, let's go back to beans and see if we can grow a decent bean crop up on some of this country that historically grows really good chickpeas, like is better suited for chickpeas. Yeah, that's sort of roughly it. Mostly around just the grubby paddock that's left behind.
Certainly an issue. It's they're not a very competitive crop. The ability to crop top them is very limited. Again, I mentioned my love-hate relationship with broadleaf metribuzin, and I think I have the same sort of relationship with chickpeas. So, but they've made people a lot of money in recent years. So I've had to swallow my bias.
Yeah. Look, they were good to us for a couple of years as well. But the ascochyticide as well, that takes a bit of the fun out of it when you're back there every 21 days. There's definitely a lot less joy then.
Yeah, definitely.
I've got to apologise. Sorry, Tony. I've got to leave.
That's fine.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
That's all right.
See you, Andrew.
Good. See you guys.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.
Okay, so we're nearing the end. We've probably had to talk about some early fungicide work or requirements for beans, and also a bit of discussion about chickpeas. Probably the only other management reminder is that we appear to be having a more insecty type year this year with a very definite good early break, and for some areas have received some very good early rains. So probably just a warning that red-legged earth mite have hatched out in a vengeance, and there's certainly loose and flea in a lot of areas. On the Murray Plains, I've been seeing a few leaf hoppers in spots. So leaf hoppers, you think that you wave your hand over the vetch, and it was vetch that I was looking at, wave your hand over it and you see things jumping, and you think, gee, that's a big, long, skinny, loosened flea. If you look carefully, it may well be a leaf hopper, and they've been touching up a few crops in isolated spots on the Murray Plains. I wouldn't say widespread, but just a crop or two that's been affected. In terms of control, it's pretty easy, and probably it's easy if you can get the product, but it's dimethylate at high rates is registered for leaf hopper controls, like about 500 mils. So yeah, keeping a bit of an eye out for leaf hoppers. If you're seeing things, crops being eaten and seeing jumping insects, might pay to get the magnifying glass out and actually work out what it is. And in isolated areas on the Murray Plains too, I've been seeing a little bit of cutworm damage in spots as well, but that's probably been more in terms of some of the early fodder brassicas that have been sown, and rather than being widespread. So it's been I haven't seen big numbers, but just enough to say, oh, that plant there is being touched up a bit by pink cutworm. So red-legged earth mite and loosened flea are probably the main ones to be looking out for at this particular point. Unless others have seen anything else that they want to share. No, that's okay. And probably the challenge at the moment is, and I think that our other agronomists would probably agree with this, is that supplies of some of our regular insecticides have been tight. So dimethylate's been hard to get hold of. A lot of my growers have moved to chlorpyrifos. They had a bit of chlorpyrifos in the shed waiting for the Russian wheat aphids, and we've been using 150 mils of chlorpyrifos for red-legged earth mite and loosened flea control to fill a gap that dimethylate would have normally covered.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Tony. Belly here quickly. Yeah, same thing. Anything we treated with bifenthrin's been fine. Some of the early feeds that never got any cover, early vetch barley mixes have been getting a bit of touch up. So yeah, the chlorpyrifos. I have noticed a few Russian wheat aphid through that Mannum area, particularly in that early barley. Actually out peaked J-Buck yesterday again in some barley. It's out there. Not big numbers, but it's around, so just be aware of that.
Yep, I'd agree, Belly. Certainly in the southern Mallee, you know, that Lameroo Pinaroo area where they picked up, you know, some really decent early rains, and then sowed some barley forages quite early. Seeing a fair amount of Russian wheat aphid through there. So yeah, I think it's worthwhile raising that one, because it'll be certainly something to look out for. Whether it's going to be in sprayable numbers or not, I'm pretty sure in the southern Mallee it will be this year. Other areas that might not have had a break till just before Anzac Day there might be a bit lighter on, but I think we've got to be more on the lookout this year than we've been the previous couple of years.
And I suppose I've noticed a lot of our sown cereal for crop has obviously had gaucho, imidacloprid, and they're clean. It's these pastures, obviously I think a 9-week withholding if you go over. So they've been left out, and they're the ones getting hit.
For sure. Imidacloprid and, you know, Cruiser's 350 FS is doing a good job. You know, in previous years, I've never had to come back and spray post-emergent after those products have been used as a seed dressing. So yeah, they do work. Okay. From the other agros and also the growers, are there any other management reminders that we ought to be talking about to get us through between now and the pre-canopy closure meeting? All right, so we've talked about insect control, we've talked about broadleaf weed control options in pulses, and touched on some of the early fungicide stuff. And we did a little bit of a tangent there to Russian wheat aphid, which is not just pulses, but worth keeping an eye out for too. All right, any other issues that anyone wants to bring up before we do a sum up and move on to doing some outside stuff?
One thing quickly with nutrition, I suppose, trace elements. And while Peter's online, we've been using a bit of the old Rapusol, ZMC, thrown in with a grass herbicide. Have you had a look at any efficacy reductions from trace elements, in particular that Rapusol, which appears to be inert, so it shouldn't bind to anything?
No idea. Sorry.
My understanding is that the chelates should be I guess, less antagonistic than the sulfates. So I'm always a little careful. Look, I come from a bit of a mid-north bias where we're having trouble getting Clethdim working at the best of times. So my attitude there is the less I can mix with Clethdim, the better. But in the Mallee where Clethdim from Peter's figures is Clethdim resistance is not as much of an issue. We've certainly been getting away with trace elements with those grass herbicides. But relatively speaking, I would have thought the chelates would be less of an issue than sulfates. But I haven't got a lot of data to back that up either.
All right. No worries. So are you putting early traces on your pulses then?
Yeah, I have a bit of a zinc bias because zinc and manganese on some of the more limey soil types, look, there's some good I guess economical ZMC mixes out there at the moment that I've been recommending to some clients. But the key trace element for pulses with me has generally been zinc, and we've looked at soil types, etc., for the other two. Any other thoughts on trace elements there from any other agros or growers? No, all good. All right, so let's draw to a close. We're at 9:40 at the moment. I'm just going to, before we do close, I'm just going to open up to the floor and just if anyone has got a reflection on this morning of something that they're going to take home and apply, or what they thought was interesting, I wouldn't mind just speaking up. So I wonder if we can can just work through the group, or what's the group that's remaining to talk through what they might have picked up from today.
Yep, I'm happy to go first, Tony.
Go for
it. From my perspective, yeah, it was great to get all the interaction, but took a lot out about the dims and the cross resistance from Peter's talk, like just learning how the actual resistance starts, and then you get those multiple crosses, and then yeah, it becomes quite challenging. And then you need to revert to multiple hits, whether it's your pre-emergent, your in-crop herbicides, and then your harvest weed seed control as well. So yeah, took a lot out of that discussion. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Brendan. Adrian, see your name on the list there. Adrian, is there any reflections on today? Something you might have got out of it or found interesting?
Yeah, new chemical for vetch coming up. Watch this space, I guess. Reflex, is that the one? I think that's what Peter said.
Tyrexor,
sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, look at reflex again. I forget what reflex is for, but I think that's useful and coming also.
Reflex is broadleaf impulses.
Yep.
Yes, it is. A broadleaf pre-emergent and looks really good.
Yep.
Thanks, Adrian.
What was the other one, sorry?
There's Tyrexor was the one that Peter was mentioning.
Yeah. So yeah, be good to see them coming forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Adrian. Belly, anything that you found interesting or out of today?
Probably to what Brendan said, Peter's talk on, it's probably going to reinforce my robust rates of Clethdim in pulses. Obviously, canola's got a limitation for seed flower burn, but yeah, I was actually revisiting this only 2 days ago with some other consultants and agros about rates and that mix with the hoxie and where we go. But yeah, keeping the
For
sure. But I might be right or wrong. Is it going to be Tyrexor or Voraxor in Australia?
I think it's Tyrexor.
Watch this space. Thanks, Belly. Thanks for your input. David Evans, anything that you've got out of today that you'd like to mention? David's muted. I'll move on to Jack.
No, I'm not.
Jack, there you go. David, any reflections on today?
Yeah, look, just a quick plug if I might. Next Tuesday, whatever date Tuesday is, 16th I think it is, or something like that, we're running a webinar basically specifically aimed at farmers and covering all the COVID-19 resources that are available through the federal government, so things that you may or may not be able to apply for. Just check my social media page, check my Twitter page, you'll see it on there. But I think would save everyone a lot of time of having to hunt around stuff individually because it's now all in one spot. So I'd urge you, if you've got an hour or so to spend on Tuesday, jump on. But thanks to everyone for organising today. I think it's a really good use of technology and a hell of a lot warmer than it would have been standing out in the paddock somewhere at 8 o'clock.
Thanks, David. Jack, any reflections on today?
Yeah, the Clethdim information is very interesting because that's what we'll be doing in the next week or so. So, reaffirming what we're doing.
Yep. Nice robust rates and using ammonium sulfate and quality products. It's good.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Jack, Nev, any reflections on today?
Yeah, Sony, look, I'll just say what Brendan, on Brendan again, that mutation side, I hadn't realised about sort of the double mutation, triple mutation, and we've got a task ahead of us to try and combat that. So thanks, Peter, very much for everything you're doing on that front. The other one was I'd completely forgotten about tebuconazole for Cercospora with this. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. So yeah, thank you very much.
And that's the beauty of these meetings, is that we try and have a management reminder there so things don't get left off. So thank you for that. It's good. Let's move on to Sharon. Sharon, any reflections?
I'd just reiterate the genetic stuff. So that was really interesting in terms of the resistance, and definitely as growers, we need to be making sure that we're doing the right thing. So in terms of using the right rates and the right chemicals, and not one thing. The other thing was the discussion around ammonium sulfate. I found that actually quite interesting. And the final thing was the looking out for insects. So our long weekend is going to be monitoring crops. So good tips for what to look for.
That's good. Thanks, Sharon, and thanks for sharing that those photos and your experience with that inoculator too. That was really interesting. It shows that, you know, stuff you get off Twitter works. It's great. Thanks for that. Let's move down to Troy. Troy, any reflections on today from yourself?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks. We get the weekend off now. We're going to go out spraying Clethdim, but yeah, the first topic, yeah, good to know. Cheers.
That's excellent. No, that's good. I don't think I've missed anybody. No, I don't think I've... Stuart? Oh, sorry, Stuart.
No need to apologise. It's just good to hear everything was going on, obviously, and see what's going on out there. But more aligned with what I do, it was good to hear Andrew Hansen talk about Bateman lupins in opposed to durian lupins, because seems to be a lot of unknowns when it comes to lupins. They've not a lot's been done on them lately, and there's some talk on Twitter that they have potentially have lower metribuzin tolerance to other varieties, but Andrew seemingly thinks they have a slightly higher tolerance to metribuzin. So it's a bit unknown in this area. So it was good to hear him talk about the Bateman lupins and obviously the Bendoc beans as well, growing Bendoc beans, but not necessarily for the IMI tolerance for the in-crop use of Innovix or Intercept, but more so for the residual. But yeah, so no, that was very pertinent to what we do. So yeah, no, it was good.
Excellent. Good to have you along too, Stuart. It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, let's draw it to a close. Next session. Good question. Normally we hold a field session pre-canopy closure, so that we're talking about, you know, getting ourselves sorted for fungicides, spring pests, those sorts of things. Look, we'll just see where things track with social distancing, etc. For the Murray Plains group, or the Mannum group, I was looking to actually cart you off to the mid-north and have a look at some pulse growing through there. Can you just leave it with us for the moment to see where we sit with COVID-19 restrictions, but also how MSF feels about groups getting together. But watch this space. We'll do something pre-canopy closure, whether it be a video session like we have today, but hopefully we'll be actually out in the field and having a look at crops. So we'll keep in touch there. Before we do close, though, can I please thank very sincerely Peter Boutsalis for making himself available today, and I've heard Peter speak on this a couple of times now. Every time I hear him speak, I get something new out of it, and he puts it across, puts some very technical stuff across in a very understandable way. So thanks, Peter. That's been really good today. And Tegan from MSF. Tegan, thank you very much for being our host today and doing the technicals. You've done a wonderful job. You've sorted out both me and Peter and flicked through a few slides as well. And the great news is we haven't had gate crashes coming from the US or South America, or like I did with my first video conference with the Mannum Pulse Group, which was quite interesting. So thank you, Tegan, as well.
No worries.
So this has been recorded, and the recording will be available to those who weren't able to make it today, or if you want to recap on some of the stuff that we've talked about today, You can have a log into that on YouTube, and we'll send the link around via email after this meeting. So, and again, Tegan, thank you very much for making that, doing the videoing and posting that sort of thing. So, look, let's draw it to a close. Thanks all the attendees as well. It's been a great session this morning, and yeah, it just shows that the technology can work. But hopefully, we'll get out in the field fairly soon. So, good luck with the spraying programs, and look forward to seeing a few of your faces pre-canopy closure for the next session.
Okay. Right.
Thank you.
See ya.
Cheers, everyone.